Good evening, students. I hope you're doing well. This is Professor Escobar, and I'm here to present you with a little workshop on getting your story started. Um, First, I want to say that congratulations for starting your stories. It's challenging to start writing. Um, it's always a struggle to believe in yourself. Writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez felt like he was an imposter his whole life, and it's something that he always had to fight off. And so I know that when I was in your shoes, I wouldn't be satisfied until I really made something, until I really committed to myself to the page. And I'm excited for you because it's just a matter of time when that happens. And it's not so hard to sit down and write a sentence, but it's hard to sit down and find your own voice, to think about how you're going to share your gift with the world. And that's what takes a minute. All right, so I'm going to give you 3 tips for starting your story, and they're three thought experiments. Um, so if you're stuck and you don't know how to start a story, this is for you. The first thought experiment is to imagine a character. What it's like to be them, what it's like to, what do they love, what do they not love, how do they conduct themselves, and just let us see that character in their element. The second thought experiment is to present us with a dare, like truth or dare, something fun, something interesting, something that we really want to do, and now is your chance to actually do it on the page, or for a character to do it on the page in your story. And then the last thought experiment is to imagine a conversation. Like, place yourself in a cafe, in a someone else's residence, on a beach, or wherever your mind takes you, and imagine that you're hearing a conversation that is meant for one specific person or between 2 specific people, but it's a conversation that kind of involves the world in some way. So what I'm going to do is, after I just gave you this overview, is now I want to read 3 different uh, short stories, the start of those short stories, and then talk about like how they, you know, um, do those thought experiments that I just listed. All right, so the 3 stories that I'm going to read from to you for tonight are The Women Warrior by Maxine Hung Kingston, which I referenced in lecture. We're going to do this one last. This is Imagine a Conversation. I'm also going to read from Chicano Stories, or Chicano Sketches by Mario Suarez, a short story collection I also love. And it does a really amazing job with descriptions and imagining worlds and imagining people. And it's kind of a rare text because not until the Chicano rights movement was there a lot of creation around like Chicano art and what it meant to be Mexican American, because that identity wasn't really forged until the 1940s, and then the Chicano rights movement, as you know, came decades later. So this is kind of an artifact between um, those two, or that kind of precedes the Chicano rights movement. So it's really exciting. Anyways, um, and it was made in the 1950s. He started writing. And then the last is a very contemporary story written by a friend and someone I went to school with, and we worked on the same newspaper. Her name is Meg Elison, and I'm going to read from her story as well. She writes about a bunch of teenagers from a middle of a nowhere town in California that see a pumpkin, a giant pumpkin that's like the um, the prize of this fair, this really monotonous fair that they have, and becomes a symbol for everything they hate about where they're from. All right, so first I think I'll start with Chicano stories. And I'm going to read a short story called Senor Garza. Um, and I want you to think about character and how this author is building character through his short story. And you can access this PDF, what I'm about to read, um, by clicking below, in the link below. Many consider Garza's barbershop as not truly in El Hoyo because it is on Conga Street and therefore downtown. Senor Garza, its proprietor, cashier, janitor, and St. Francis, philosophizes that since it is situated in that part of the street where the land decidedly slopes, it is in El Hoyo. Who would question it? Who contributes to every cause for which a solicitor comes in with a long face and a longer relation of sadness? Who is the easiest touch for all the drunks who have to buy their daily cures? For loafers who go to look for jobs and never find them? For bullfighters on the wrong side of the border? For boxers, still amateurs, though punchy? For barbers without barber shops? And for the endless line of moochers who drop in to borrow anything from 2 bits to $2? Naturally, Garza. Garza's barbershop is more than razors, scissors, and hair. It is where men disgruntled at the vice of the rest of the world come to air their views. It is where they come to get things off their chests, along with their hair off their heads and beard off their faces. Garza's barbershop is where everyone sooner or later goes, or should. This does not mean that there are no other barbershops in El Hoyo. There are, but none of them seem quite to capture the atmosphere that Garza's does. If it were not downtown, it would probably have a little fighting rooster tied to a stake by the front door. If it were not rented to Senor Garza, only it would perhaps smell of sherry wine all day. To Garza's barbershop goes all that is good and bad. The lawbreakers come to rub elbows with sheriff deputies, and toward all, Garza is the same. When zoot suiters come in for a very slight trim, Garza, who is very versatile, puts on a bit of zoot talk and hepcats with the zootiest of them. When the boys that are not zoot suiters come in, he becomes, for the purpose of accommodating his clientele, just as big a snob as their individual personalities require. When necessity calls for a change in his character, Garza can assume the proportions of a Greek or a Chinaman, a gypsy, a Republican, a Democrat, or if only his close friends are in the shop playing Garza. So I think this is a really stunning passage because it does a number of things that I think are going to help you write your story. One, it imagines a leading character, and it imagines them, Garza and his element, this barbershop in a border town that's like in an intersection of all these cultures, Mexican and American, rich and poor, political versus street. And he is kind of this at the center of it all, and he's kind of facilitating it all. And then it does this other technique that's really cool that my friend's therapist told them about, which is to imagine a person or a problem or a situation from 4 different perspectives. 1, from your own perspective. 2, from a perspective of a friend or someone who cares about you. 3, of someone who cares about them but is not involved in the situation. And 4, someone who is removed from the situation entirely. And I like this description, and something I encourage you to do is to imagine your character from those 4 points of view, and I have them listed below. Another thing that it does that I think is really effective is that it has an assortment of details. So by that, an assortment, I mean it draws from different aspects of life, different realms, different social circles, different cultures. You know, there's a little bit about politics, There's a little bit about geography and where it is in the cityscape. There's a little bit about the zoot suiters. There's a little bit about the boxers, and bullfighters who are lost in the U.S. So I encourage you to use an assortment of details. Don't just focus on their, what they look like. Don't just focus on like what their room looks like. My kitchen is dirty. Focus on things that are near to them and far to them, and things that they intersect with, things that are big, that really matter, things that don't really matter to them, an assortment of details. All right. And I have a few more notes you can look at in the below. So another way that you might want to start your story is by posing a dare. All right, just like truth or dare. Use this story as an opportunity to think about, to live through an experience that maybe you haven't had yet. And I'm sure if it's experience you haven't had and really want to have, a number of people are going to want to. So dare your character to do something. Dare them to live a little. All right, so this story that I'm going to read to you from Meg Elison does just that. And it's called Al Huge, with an apostrophe on the E. So maybe it's like Al Huhe or something. I don't know. When I was 15, I slew a giant that had done me no harm. I had to do it. There was no other way. I lived in the kind of town that nobody believes exists anymore. An hour from any freeway, we were surrounded by oranges on one side and cows on the other, with tumbleweed traversing the valley when the wind kicked up. This wasn't Oklahoma. It was Southern California. In a yearly culmination of a fall harvest festival, because Halloween is pagan and somehow a harvest is not, farmers from all over the valley brought in the biggest pumpkins they had grown. There were no prohibitions on performance-enhancing drugs in the squash Olympics. People tried everything from Miracle-Gro to burying their gently radioactive fiesta-ware in the dirt. The pumpkins grew monstrous, sloping and misshapen, formless under their own mass. Their coloring was like a cavernous flesh. They had no beauty, only bigness. The biggest one that year was called Alhuhe, Alhuge, over 1,200 pounds of pale, goldish, and edible pumpkin. The farmer took a blue ribbon and the paper got his picture. The gourd sat out in the Indian summer heat on public display. In the purpling light, long after school had ended, I sat forgotten at the edge of a parking lot. I was debating whether to give up and try sleeping at a friend's house or to keep waiting for someone who was likely never coming. My indecision was broken by a guy named Cole, dangerous and sexy at 17, with a scar like someone had dripped hot candle wax out of his eye socket and onto his cheek. He drove a beat-up black pickup truck with red duct tape, plain understudy to tail lights. I didn't think twice when he told me to get in. So in that first page, she's setting up this story about destroying this pumpkin. And I really like how she sets up the different conditions and different kind of pressures that she's feeling as a young teenager, of wanting to do something big with your life, but living in the middle of nowhere, living where you don't feel like you belong, not fitting in. And then like having this wonderful picture, painting this wonderful picture of this town in the middle of nowhere that's Southern California. It turns out it was Hemet. And having the pumpkin symbolize this and this dare, we feel like we're on her side when she gets into that car. And I'm sure if you're wondering what inspiration or, what is maybe exciting for people, just think about what some of you did in high school. All right. And then this last story that I want to read from is The Woman Warrior. And I think I hinted at it in lecture, and I would really love to read it to you and to talk about conversation and how you can just begin your story with a conversation. All right, and I'm going to read from No Name Woman. You must not tell anyone, my mother said, what I am about to tell you. In China, your father had a sister who killed herself, who jumped into the family well. We say that your father has all brothers because it is as if she had never been born. In 1924, just a few days after our village celebrated 17 hurry-up weddings to make sure that every young man who went out on the road would responsibly come home, your father and his brothers and your grandfather and his brothers and your aunt's new husband sailed for America, the Gold Mountain. It was your grandfather's last trip. Those lucky enough to get contracts waved goodbye from the decks. They fed and guarded the stowaways and helped them off in Cuba, New York, Bali, Hawaii. We'll meet in California next year, they said. All of them sent money home. I remember looking at your aunt one day when she and I were dressing. I had not noticed that she had such a protruding melon of a stomach. But I did not think, she's pregnant, until she began to look like other pregnant women, her shirt pulling and the white tops of her black pants showing. She could not have been pregnant, you see, because her husband had been gone for years. No one said anything. We did not discuss it. In early summer, she was ready to have the child, long after the time when it could have been possible. The village had also been counting. On the night the baby was to be born, the villagers raided our house. Some were crying like a great saw, teeth strung with lights. Files of people walked zigzagged across our land, tearing the rice, their lanterns doubled in this disturbed black water which drained away through the broken buns. Where were we? As the villagers closed in, we can see that some of them, probably men and women we knew well, wore white masks. The people with long hair hung it over their faces. Women with short hair made it stand up on end. Some had tied white bands around their foreheads, arms, and legs. All right, so that's The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. And what I really like about that as an opener for not only a really amazing short story, but the beginning of this really hybrid experimental novel, is that it starts with a conversation. And so when you start with a conversation, that especially one that's one-sided, you can kind of play with the different chunks of your story, like she does. She starts with her mom addressing her and establishing that relationship, who the one-sided conversation is for. And then she has this wonderful description about the different men sailing to America. Some of them were stowaways that ended off in Cuba and New York and so forth. And so she gives us like a chunk in background. And then she gives us a description of her pregnant aunt that drowned herself in a well, and as being pregnant before it was a time when it could have been possible. And then she starts telling the story through her mom's perspective. And that's a perspective she's later going to change in the chapter. And I've included that whole story if you want to read further. So if you start with a one-sided conversation, you kind of give rise to like what's being said, and you really put a lot of tension. You're able to create a lot of attention because at some point the reader's going to want to jump in and say something. And you can shift around in time, like give backstory, hint at things that are going to happen in the future, because that's kind of how we talk. All right, so I hope that these 3 tips were helpful. And there's more notes below where I kind of break things down a little further. And if you need help writing your story. If you want to workshop ideas, just meet with me in office hours or message me to set up an appointment. All right. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, all.